Imagine a weapon that doesn't run out of fuel, a machine that breathes the air beneath its wings. Racing low over the ground at supersonic speed, able to fly for hours, even days. Its engine, not jet fuel, not rockets, but a nuclear reactor blasting superheated air out the back. No pilot, no mercy, and no safe way to test it without poisoning the very sky it flew through. It was called Project Pluto, and the missile it was meant to power bore a name that sounded like something from science fiction. SLAM, the Supersonic Low-Altitude Missile. For a few years during the Cold War, this nightmare concept nearly left the desert floor and took to the skies. The late 1950s were years of fear, calculation, and competition. Bombers could be shot down. Rockets were still experimental and unpredictable. Submarine fleets had not yet mastered the art of hiding silently beneath the ocean. Strategists were haunted by a single question. If your enemy struck first, how could you guarantee a strike back? One radical answer was endurance. Build a weapon that could stay in the air for as long as it needed. Another answer was unpredictability. A missile that could approach from anywhere, hugging the Earth at breakneck speed. Project Pluto promised both, and added something no other weapon had ever attempted: a nuclear ramjet. An engine with virtually limitless range. The design was terrifying in its simplicity. Instead of carrying heavy fuel tanks, the missile would inhale the atmosphere itself through a huge intake at its nose. At supersonic speed, that air would compress as it rushed inward. Then, instead of mixing with fuel, it would pass directly through an unshielded nuclear reactor, heating instantly to extreme temperatures. The result was raw thrust, blasting out of the tail. As long as the reactor stayed hot and the missile kept moving, it could keep flying. This gave SLAM the ability to roar in at treetop level, release multiple nuclear warheads over its targets, and then continue flying on, spreading destruction simply by existing. It would be fast. It would be loud, and it would be nearly impossible to intercept. The logic was cold and brutal. You cannot stop a missile that can fly almost anywhere, for as long as it wants. But before SLAM could fly, 3 impossible challenges had to be solved. The first was to build a compact nuclear reactor small enough to fit in a missile, yet powerful enough to heat, rushing air at supersonic speed. The second was to find materials strong enough to survive the furnace of radiation, oxygen, and heat without cracking or melting. And the third was perhaps the most daunting: find a place to test it without contaminating an entire region. The Nevada desert was chosen, a landscape already familiar with dangerous experiments. Engineers built what looked like an enormous steel railroad, a straight tunnel fitted with massive compressors to blast air at speeds simulating Mach flight. In the middle sat the reactor core, a brutal, unshielded block of carefully arranged fuel rods and channels, designed so that every molecule of incoming air touched its scorching surfaces before screaming out the back. On test days, the desert rumbled. Air roared through compressors. Control rods were lifted. And then it happened. The chain reaction took hold. The world's first nuclear ramjet lit up and ran. For a few extraordinary minutes, it proved that this nightmare idea was not only possible, it worked. The desert test stand shook as superheated air blasted into the sky. Instruments in the control bunker held steady. For a brief, surreal moment, the impossible had become routine. But physics always demands its price. Unlike nuclear submarines or reactors for power plants, Pluto's reactor had no shielding. There was no space and no weight allowance for it. That meant any full-scale missile screaming low over the ground would leave behind a trail of radioactive particles in its wake. Not enough to mimic a nuclear explosion, but enough to contaminate whatever it passed over. Where could you test such a thing? Not over populated land. Not across oceans shared by nations. The planet itself offered no safe proving ground, and the mission profile was equally nightmarish. To evade radar. SLAM would fly low, so low that its shockwaves alone could break windows and terrify civilians on the ground. It wouldn't carry a single warhead but many, a nuclear payload bus designed to scatter destruction across multiple cities. Flight plans looked less like carefully drawn paths and more like jagged scars slashed across maps. The guidance had to be precise, and the structure had to endure hours of relentless Mach-speed turbulence and heat. Engineers worked to design alloys and ceramics that could withstand the unimaginable environment inside the engine. They succeeded in theory, but every test ended with the same haunting questions. Could this machine ever be tested safely? And if it could, should it? Politics began to shift. While Pluto crept forward, other technologies matured quickly. Ballistic missiles gained accuracy, reliability, and reach. Submarines learned to vanish into the oceans, carrying missiles that could strike without warning. These alternatives were cheaper, cleaner, and just as terrifying to any enemy. Against them, Pluto started to look less like a clever solution and more like a radioactive liability. The ledger was clear. On one side, remarkable technical progress, a reactor that had proven itself in the Nevada desert, odd, and a missile concept almost impossible to stop. On the other, no way to test it safely, a guaranteed path of contamination, a mission profile that terrorized more than it deterred, and competitors that made it unnecessary. The order was simple: cancel it. Project Pluto was shut down in 1964. The test stands in Nevada went quiet. The unfinished intakes, ducts, and reactor cores became relics of a nightmare path not taken. SLAM never flew. The world exhaled. But insane ideas often leave behind useful traces. The material research, exotic alloys, high-temperature ceramics, fed into other projects. The computational methods for airflow and heating influenced aircraft and spacecraft designs. The precision guidance techniques shaped later missiles that did not need nuclear engines. Even the courage to test the untestable gave engineers habits of rigor that carried forward into safer programs. And above all, Pluto left a lesson written in its ashes. Capability without containability is not progress. You can build a monster. You can even prove that it works. The real test is whether you should let it fly. Project Pluto promised a weapon that could not be outrun or intercepted. In the end, what it delivered was a mirror, showing how far a nation was willing to go in the name of safety, and how close ingenuity can carry us to the edge before wisdom pulls us back. It is remembered not because it flew, but because it didn't. And that may have been its greatest service. Power proves restraint proves that you understand. The question left behind is simple, but eternal. If it were your choice, would you have let it fly?